time is re-expanded and explored. And here in the Swiss Pavilion, I think also the Venice Biennale 2014, the archive is moved into a display space, and that process of unpacking and reinterpreting and finding new and productive narrative is enacted.
So as the studio will travel to Brussels in Belgium from the 21st to the 25th of October, and there we're going to do a workshop with the architecture collective Rota. And Rota kind of is interested through their deconstruction unit in the afterlife of buildings. So they often intervene at sites of demolition, and they collect and salvage materials that they then categorize and then sell on to be reinserted into the city fabric. So on the 23rd, which is the Monday, we're going to visit their vast material archive and kind of mine for some of these treasures that we can then potentially use in our own project. This kind of Rota's attitude to time and the endpoints of things made us think of the project by the artist Robert Smithson, who talks about these kinds of buildings as ruins in reverse. And it's this sort of attitude to thinking about what's the lifespan of a material or an object that we're really interested in exploring this year. We're also going to visit local practices, such as Office KGDBS. Their archive of projects is all kind of very meticulously numbered on their website. This is project number 78. It's a library at the University of Ghent, where a kind of new metal structure was inserted inside a historic 19th century building. This is another practice we'll be visiting, 51N4E, and this is the project that they did for Brussels to create a kind of special zone for the EU. And they were looking at how they could map the stars of the European Union flag onto the city as an organizational strategy. Speaking of the EU, we're going to try to visit this famous hemicycle auditorium to see how the decisions made in this room impact the rest of the continent. And we'll make a day trip to Mons in Belgium to see what looks like kind of a large wall of drawers, but actually contains 12 million cards. It was a project that was opened in 1910, and it was an attempt to write down all the existing knowledge in the world at that time. So it's a kind of precursor to the internet, and probably the first attempt to archive knowledge at this scale. So that's a kind of approximation of our trip costs, including the Eurostar to Brussels, accommodation, the day trip to Mons, and then all entry fees. We're hoping it'll come in more towards the lower end, and we're going to book that as soon as possible.
So then returning to the UK, our site will be Battersea in southwest London, and we'll use the archive as a provocation to explore this site. Battersea is particularly fascinating at the moment. It's an area of enormous change. I think the Nine Elms development is, I think, still the UK's largest building site and construction project, and yet at the same time there's great, huge continuity or seeming continuity. For example, Gilbert Scott's Battersea Power Station here, reimagined. So there's all these various scales of change that can be explored, such as the secondary siting of New Covent Garden Market, which takes in name but in activity a certain part of London into another, and then also scales of change that are very instant and disastrous, such as the fire on Battersea Arts Centre, which is currently being redeveloped. And then so we just wanted to play a clip of a film by the artist Alice May Williams, and this is called Dream City, More, Better, Sooner. We'd encourage you to watch the kind of extended clip online, but this really summarises these kind of tensions of change at play in Battersea.
The market, the post office, there goes the weekend, leisure, here comes a new market, here comes the future haunting the present, here comes the present moment, future plans or reenactments of the past. Here comes the railway again, resurrected, glass and steel structures, towers of illuminated light, power, new life, more, better, sooner, higher, but for who?
So just quickly, in terms of methodologies that we're going to employ this year to craft our projects, we're going to start the year next Wednesday at the Churchill War Rooms at the Imperial War Museum in London, and it's an interesting opportunity to see how different activities and events during the Second World War are captured within a kind of more spatial archive. And from there, we'll ask each of you to create a memory room in the style of different artists, whether that's Thomas Demand, whose paper model you saw earlier in our presentation, or this project by Rachel Whiteread, which is an untitled house where she cast the interiors of a condemned terraced house. Or this project by Ilya Kabakov, which is an archive, a fictional archive of a man who never threw anything away, and it's all the everyday objects in his collection. This is a project by Gregor Schneider. His practice involves building a lot of rooms with historic significance, but also with a kind of psychological weight embedded within them. This is called Tote's House, You Are, and it's a dead house. And it was also a Venice Biennale Golden Lion winner in 2001. Or this kind of fictional student project by Amandine Kassler, where she puts into the space of a single room, Rem Koolhaas working on the project of the City of the Captive Globe, that I think was shown earlier in the DS1 presentation. And then he's inspired by Campo Marzio by Piranesi on the wall and the unfolding verticality of Manhattan out of his window. We're also going to dig into the preservationist toolbox, as epitomized in this quote by Jorge Otero Pylos, whether that's reconstruction, replication, reduction, recreation, refinishing, and reinstallation, to develop tools to intervene within the existing city. And for our portfolios, we'll be inspired by Abby Warburg's Mnemosyne Atlas, which is a kind of vast unfinished archive that looked at how representation evolved from the classical period to the Renaissance, as well as this critical cut-up method that was used by Lucas Feireis in the recent book, Memories of the Moon Age, that kind of combines fictions, histories, myths, all into one book on a single subject, the moon. And we'll continue using the tools we used last year on 3D scanning and image capture to find new and more contemporary ways to record the city. So this is an image by ScanLab of historic Rome, and it combines all the above-ground structures with all the hidden underground passageways that also exist within the city.
We're going to briefly show you a few projects from the past couple of years, and these are projects that aren't necessarily buildings, but are all very much architectural, and we stress that, I think as was said by another studio, in your 5th year, we're very much interested in you developing your own thesis and your own criticality, so all these projects are quite different. This is a project by Chris, who proposed the Museum of Uncollectibles. Here he collected through a kind of choreographed move through New York, things such as the void or a view, and kind of explored the line between heritage and also the development in the area of the Lower East Side. This is a project by David, who uncovered this kind of fascinating loophole in New York where money from foreign aid schemes for a very impoverished area, East Harlem, was actually being moved to what's known as Billionaires Row to fund the building of luxury towers. And in his project, he used the architecture of these quite restricted East Harlem apartments to intersect with the luxury condos, so rendering a kind of an unusable opulence. And Inez, she was interested in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, a one-day event, but she explored the whole calendar of preparation and disassembly and proposed that this was perhaps the real timeline of New York, of consumption and rebuilding, and from that made a territory of shrines. This is a project by Anuvab, the Museum of Fact and Fiction, which occupied Marine Park on the edge of New York. And here he had a really interesting kind of strategy, a reading of what fiction was. It was anything that couldn't be seen. So in the end, proposed structures that were never built took the same status as demolished work and brought these kind of hybrid structures about. And this was shortlisted for the RIBA Silver Medal and toured internationally to be shown.
And then from
Half a
last
second.
year, yeah, we're going to speed through the rest.
21 minutes so far.
So just from last year, this All of Us project, which was emphasizing the island-like qualities of Dungeness, and built a staging post for this to be enacted. Helen's project that looked at decay and deterioration and how to corrupt the afterlife of buildings, looking at how the landscape could start to take over a project. Really quickly.
Really quickly.
3
seconds.
The blog.
Yeah.
This is our slide from last year.
So my background's in fine art and architectural history. When I'm not here, I lead a kind of interdisciplinary research degree at London Met, and I also teach in fine art and photography.
And I work on the public program at the AA, and I run a diploma unit there. And I also teach on their equivalent of MPL on alternative forms of practice. Maddie Kessler is our technology tutor this year. She worked on the Battersea Arts Centre project. We're going to have drawing workshops, visits by artists, detailed drawing workshops, and thank you very much. We look forward to meeting you later.